unaware she was a billionaire's granddaughter. Her husband dumped her in a shelter after her baby shower, but what happened months later left him speechless. He didn't just abandon her, he delivered her. Right outside a women's shelter, under a glowing sign that made her feel branded, Brandon Knowles parked the car, opened the passenger door, and motioned like he was dropping off something he no longer wanted. Lydia Short stood there, 7 months pregnant, clutching a small bag in her worn purse while her body shook from more than cold. Behind the windshield, his mother, Agnes Eldridge, sat upright with a face that said this had been decided long before tonight. In the back seat, Vicky Bray, heels crossed, lips curled, watched Lydia like she was watching a chair being cleared for her. Brandon didn't raise his voice. That's what made it feel unreal. He leaned in just enough for Lydia to smell his cologne and hear the sentence that cut deeper than any shouting. "You're not my problem anymore." Lydia's mouth opened, but no sound came. Her phone was useless. Her cards had already stopped working hours ago. Her home was already locked to her. And the worst part, she could still hear the baby shower music in her head, like a cruel echo. Because just hours earlier, she had walked into her baby shower thinking it was a fresh start, pink ribbons, smiling faces, cameras for memories. She didn't know the microphone wasn't for games. She didn't know the envelope in Brandon's hand wasn't a toast. She didn't know Vicky wasn't a guest. Now she was standing at a shelter door, trying not to collapse, with only one strange comfort left, a heavy old ring her father once begged her never to pawn. What they didn't know, what Brandon, Agnes, and Vicky didn't even suspect, was this. Lydia wasn't just a quiet wife they could erase. She was a billionaire's granddaughter. And weeks later, when the right documents surfaced and the right screen lit up in the right room, Brandon would try to speak only to realize his voice was gone. Dear viewers, thank you for being here. If you watch without subscribing, it's like standing in that parking lot and saying nothing while Lydia is left behind. Subscribe now and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The plate hit the counter so hard the bread jumped. Lydia Short, 30 years old, 7 months pregnant, and trying not to shake, froze mid-breath. Her hand flew to her belly like a shield. The baby kicked once, sharp and urgent, as if even the unborn could feel when a room turned dangerous. Across the kitchen island stood Brandon Knowles, 33, her husband. He wasn't yelling. That was the worst part. His anger lived in his silence, now tight jaw, hard eyes, the kind of stare that made Lydia feel like she had done something wrong just by existing. At the edge of the room sat Agnes Eldridge, 58, Brandon's mother, a woman who treated family like a business and love like a privilege you could lose. Agnes watched Lydia the way someone studies a stain they want to scrub out. "Bread again?" Agnes muttered, voice dry with disgust. "No wonder you're like this." She didn't finish the sentence, but Lydia heard it anyway. Heavy, plain, too much, not enough. Brandon didn't correct his mother. He didn't say, "Stop talking to my wife like that." He simply looked at Lydia like she had embarrassed him with groceries. Lydia swallowed. She forced her lips into a small smile. She told herself she could carry the mood the way she carried the baby, carefully, quietly, without complaint. Because Lydia still believed patience saved marriages. Lydia had been trained for quiet love long before she met Brandon. She grew up in small rooms and smaller hopes, raised by a man she called her father, Mr. Short. A steady, tired man with rough hands who never explained why they moved so often or why her mother's name was never spoken in full. Lydia's mother died when Lydia was little old enough to remember the warmth of her arms, young enough to forget the sound of her voice. After the funeral, their life became rules. Rule 1, don't ask strangers for help. Rule 2, never brag. Rule 3 said in a voice that sounded like a warning and a prayer at the same time, we don't borrow pride from money. If Lydia asked why they lived so simply, Mr. Short would say simple was safe. If she asked why her mother never had family visiting, his face would tighten and he'd say, some families don't love, they own. Lydia didn't understand that sentence until she married Brandon. Brandon loved her at first like she was a fresh start, sweet, hardworking, grateful. He liked that she didn't demand. He liked that she didn't fight. He liked that she was easy to shape. And Lydia, starving for stability, gave him everything that proved devotion. She used her savings money she'd built from years of careful living to help Brandon pay for a professional course that boosted his career. She sold her old car, the one Mr. Short had left her, so Brandon could clear a debt that stressed him out. When Brandon insisted the lease and bills should stay in his name for credit reasons, Lydia agreed, believing marriage meant trust, not paperwork. What Lydia did keep because her father made her promise was a small jewelry box she never discussed. Inside was a heavy gold ring with a strange design. When he'd given it to her, Mr. Short had looked more serious than she'd ever seen him. Never pawn it, never trade it. If the world ever turns cold and you have nowhere to go, there's a women's shelter called Westbrook. Ask for a woman named Bertha. Show her this ring. She'll know what to do. Lydia had laughed nervously back then. It sounded dramatic. She thought he was just scared she'd end up poor and alone. She never imagined the ring was part of a plan quietly written years ago, an identity buried on purpose, protected by law, locked behind DNA confirmation and conditions. A protective trust existed in her name, set to open fully when she turned 35, or early, if legal proof ever showed she'd been stripped of safety and support. She didn't know that. All she knew was she had married into a family that now looked at her like she was a mistake. Lydia turned back to the table and folded baby clothes, one tiny onesie at a time, smoothing each piece like it could smooth her life too. The nursery bag sat open nearby. She had been packing quietly, humming earlier, trying to keep her heart calm for the baby. But Brandon's presence had changed the air. He watched her from the doorway the way a manager watches an employee who keeps messing up. He used to touch her belly and smile. Now he mostly stared at his phone, as if something inside it mattered more than the life Lydia was carrying. Agnes didn't pretend to be kind anymore. She didn't need to. "You're always eating," Agnes said, eyes narrowing. "Then you wonder why you look tired." Lydia felt heat rise in her cheeks. She told herself not to react. Reacting gave Agnes power. Brandon finally spoke, low and cold. "Don't start drama, Lydia. Just don't embarrass me." Embarrass him, like her pregnancy was a public mistake. Like her body was a shameful project. Lydia opened her mouth, maybe to say she wasn't trying to embarrass anyone, maybe to ask what had changed, but the words died when Brandon's phone buzzed. He checked it fast. Turned the screen away. Lydia noticed anyway, the quick movement, the guarded posture, the way his eyes hardened, like the message had reminded him of something he wanted. She told herself not to imagine things, not to accuse, not to become the too emotional woman Agnes wanted her to be. Still, the baby kicked again, and Lydia's stomach tightened with a quiet, creeping warning. She remembered being 16, crying over a school friend who suddenly stopped talking to her. "Mr. Short had looked at her for a long time and said, "Some people keep you around only while you're useful. The moment you become inconvenient, they'll act like you never mattered." Lydia had hated that sentence. Now it came back like a bruise you forgot you had until someone pressed it. That night, when Agnes went to the guest room and Brandon disappeared into the hallway with his phone, Lydia quietly opened her jewelry box. Her fingers found the ring, heavy, cold, strange. She held it in her palm and felt foolish for needing comfort from metal. From the hallway, Agnes's voice drifted through the house, soft enough to be private, sharp enough to cut. "She's a liability," Agnes whispered to Brandon. "And once the baby comes, she'll be dead weight." There was a pause. Then Brandon's voice, quieter, agreeing without saying it outright. Lydia's breath caught. Her hand tightened around the ring. Brandon's phone buzzed again, closer this time. Lydia stepped into the hall before she could stop herself. She saw the name on the screen for half a second before Brandon's thumb covered it. Vicky. Brandon's face changed instantly, less irritation, more focus, like the message had purpose, like it was instructions. Agnes appeared behind him, eyes bright with a private satisfaction that made Lydia's skin go cold. "Answer," Agnes murmured. "Don't keep her waiting." Lydia stood there pregnant and silent, realizing something that made her throat go dry. This wasn't a marriage drifting apart. This was a plan unfolding, and the next person who stepped into their home wouldn't be a guest. She would be a replacement. Soon Lydia wouldn't just see that name on a screen. She would see Vicky Bray sitting where Lydia belonged. The front door opened without a knock. Lydia's whole body went still. The baby kicked hard, like a warning bell inside her. She was standing in the living room with a folded blanket in her hands when she heard heels, sharp, confident clicks moving across the floor, like the person already belonged there. Brandon didn't look surprised. That was the first punch. Agnes didn't even stand up. That was the second. Then the woman stepped into view. Vicky Bray, 32. Polished, slim, and smiling like she had already won, walked in wearing a fitted coat that looked expensive and a confidence that felt even more costly. She wasn't a friend, she wasn't a cousin, she wasn't anyone Lydia had ever met. But Vicky looked around Lydia's home as if she was inspecting a purchase. Lydia's mouth went dry. Brandon had said it would be a quick work thing, just paperwork, just a meeting, nothing personal. Yet Vicky's eyes landed on Lydia's belly and didn't soften. They sharpened, amused. "Oh," Vicky said lightly, as if she had just noticed a decoration. "So, you're really close." Lydia turned to Brandon, waiting for him to explain, waiting for him to look ashamed. He only adjusted his shirt and cleared his throat like he was the one being inconvenienced. "This is Vicky," Brandon said. His voice was calm, almost proud. "She's helping with business strategy, cleaning things up, cleaning, helping." Lydia had never heard those words inside her home before. Agnes finally spoke from her seat, voice smooth as a knife. "Don't stand there like a statue, Lydia. Offer her something. Offer her something." Like Vicky was a guest. Lydia's fingers tightened around the blanket. Politeness was the only armor she'd ever been taught. "Hi," Lydia managed. "Nice to meet you." Vicky smiled wider, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sure it is." Lydia told herself not to panic. This could still be normal. Business people came and went. Brandon had been busy lately. Maybe this was just that, but nothing about the room felt normal. Brandon stayed close to Vicky, not Lydia. His body angled toward the other woman like that was where his attention lived now. And Agnes watched Lydia the way a supervisor watches a worker about to be replaced. Lydia saw it in the small things. Vicky didn't ask before she sat down. She chose the seat Lydia always used near Brandon, near the center. She crossed her legs slowly, as if she were settling into position. When Lydia moved toward her own seat, Agnes tapped the chair lightly with her fingers. "Let her sit there," Agnes said. "You can take the side." The side. Like Lydia was staff. Brandon didn't protest. He didn't say, "That's my wife's chair." He didn't even look at Lydia's face. He just said, "Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. It's fine." Lydia repeated it in her head like a prayer. Her heart beat too fast, like her body understood what her mind refused to accept. Vicky began talking about Brandon's work with an easy, practiced tone, like she belonged inside his life. "Your expenses are messy," Vicky said, pulling out a thin folder. "Some inefficiencies, some drains. Drains." Lydia heard the word and felt her stomach tighten. Vicky flipped a page and pointed at something. Brandon leaned closer to see, close enough that Lydia could smell Vicky's perfume from across the room. Agnes smiled like she was watching a performance she'd paid for. Lydia tried to make sense of it. She had supported Brandon. She had saved money for him. She had sacrificed. She had stayed quiet when he snapped. She had smiled through his distance. Wasn't that what devotion meant? Then Vicky said, in that same casual voice, "A lot of the spending patterns, they're emotional, not strategic. If you want investors to respect you, we have to remove that noise." Her eyes flicked to Lydia. The insult was gentle, dressed in professional words, but Lydia felt it land like a slap. Brandon nodded. "That's what I've been saying." Lydia's throat tightened. "He's been saying? Saying what about her?" Agnes leaned forward, voice dripping with fake concern. "Lydia doesn't understand how pressure works. She thinks life is feelings." Lydia's cheeks warmed with shame. She wanted to defend herself. She wanted to say she had been the one holding this home together while Brandon chased status. But the room was built against her. And the baby kicked again, hard, like it was demanding she protect them. Vicky wasn't loud. That was what made her dangerous. She spoke in numbers and reports. She used words like audit, risk, financial hygiene. She made it sound official, like Lydia's existence could be measured and reduced. Vicky glanced around the living room. "This space could be optimized too," she said, smiling. "Less clutter, less softness, softness." Lydia knew she meant her. Brandon laughed, a short laugh that cut. "You should see how she packs baby stuff, like we're opening a daycare." He used to smile at the baby clothes. He used to hold them up and joke about tiny socks. Now he made her joy sound stupid. Agnes added quietly, "He needs a partner who won't hold him back. Someone who understands the numbers." Partner. Lydia's fingers trembled. Her father's ring flashed through her mind, heavy and cold. Mr. Short's voice echoed too. "We don't borrow pride from money. But in this house, pride came from status. And Lydia was being treated like a liability. Vicky's gaze dropped to Lydia's belly again. Her lips curved just slightly, and she leaned toward Agnes as if Lydia wasn't even there. "Once the baby comes," Vicky murmured, soft enough to feel private but loud enough for Lydia to catch. "She'll be too tired to push back on anything." "That's when we finalize the changes." Agnes didn't react with shock. She nodded once, slow and certain, like the plan had already been written. Brandon's phone buzzed. He checked it and smirked like something was moving forward exactly as expected. Lydia felt her heart sink. Too tired to push back on what? Vicky stood, smoothing her coat like she was preparing to leave or preparing to return whenever she wanted. Before walking out, she turned back and looked Lydia up and down, calm and cruel. "For success," Vicky said lightly, voice sweet as poison. "Some people have to be removed." Brandon didn't correct her. Agnes smiled. And Lydia realized, with a cold rush, that this wasn't just an affair hiding in shadows. This was a takeover happening in her face. Brandon reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. His grip was firm, his expression flat like he had practiced this in a mirror. He set the envelope on the table. Not for Vicky, for Lydia. Lydia's eyes locked onto it, breath caught, stomach tight, because she didn't need to open it to feel what it was. At the baby shower they were planning, that envelope wouldn't stay private. It would become a spectacle. The microphone screamed. A high, ugly squeal cut through the hotel function room just as Lydia stepped inside, so sharp it made her flinch and press her palm to her belly. The baby jolted, startled too. Cameras flashed at the same time, bright bursts of light that made Lydia blink like she'd walked into a stage, not a celebration. For half a second she couldn't breathe. Then she saw the decorations, pink ribbons, balloons, shiny welcome baby letters, and forced her lungs to work again. "It's just a baby shower," she told herself. "It's supposed to be happy." But the way people looked at her didn't feel happy. It felt curious, waiting, like they were watching a show that hadn't started yet. Lydia's eyes searched the crowd until she found Brandon. He stood near the front, close to the microphone stand, one hand on a thick envelope. His grip was too tight. His shoulders were too stiff. He looked like a man holding something heavy that wasn't paper. Agnes was near him, calm and perfectly dressed, scanning the room the way she scanned Lydia's life, like she was checking if everything was in place. And then Lydia saw her. Vicky. Not hiding, not sneaking, just standing there near the gift table like she belonged next to the family. She wore a soft smile that felt sharp underneath, and her eyes lingered on Lydia's belly for a beat too long. Lydia's stomach tightened. So this wasn't a simple celebration. This was an event. Lydia tried to steady herself. She kept her face gentle. She walked forward slowly, one careful step at a time, because her body was heavy and the room felt heavier. She told herself Brandon had invited Vicky because of work. She told herself Agnes was acting strange because Agnes was always strange. She told herself the envelope was probably paperwork. Anything was easier than the truth forming in her chest. A hand touched Lydia's elbow. Marion Blackburn, 29. Lydia's friend from a prenatal support group stood beside her with worried eyes. Marion wasn't family, but she had become the kind of person Lydia trusted, the kind who looked at her like she mattered. Marion leaned close, voice low. "Are you okay? You look pale." Lydia tried to smile. "Don't ruin the day," she warned herself. "Don't be emotional. Don't give them a reason." "I'm fine," Lydia said, even though her throat felt tight. Marion's eyes drifted past Lydia to Brandon and Agnes. "This doesn't feel like a normal baby shower." Lydia's heart thumped faster. She wanted to deny it, but she couldn't. The room was filled with people Lydia barely knew, some of Brandon's co-workers, a few older relatives who usually ignored her, and strangers holding phones like they were ready to record anything. Why were there so many cameras? Lydia's gaze landed on a man with a professional camera rig near the back. He wasn't a guest. He'd been hired. Agnes had arranged this. Of course she had. Joy had been invited, but dread had been seated first. Agnes approached with a bright smile that never warmed her eyes. "There you are," Agnes said, loud enough for others to hear. "Don't stand in the doorway. People are waiting to see you." Waiting. Not celebrating. Waiting. Agnes guided Lydia forward with a firm hand at her back, steering her like she was a prop. Lydia's gaze flicked around for a chair, her chair, the seat she expected near Brandon. It was taken. Vicky sat there with her legs crossed, relaxed, amused, holding a glass, like she was the guest of honor. Lydia stopped walking. Agnes didn't stop. She leaned in and murmured, still smiling, "Take the side seat, Lydia. Don't make things awkward." The side seat was near the wall, closer to the serving table than to Brandon. Not a place for the mother to be. A place for someone who didn't matter. Lydia felt heat rise behind her eyes. She fought it down. She lowered herself into the side seat slowly, carefully. Marion sat close, protective. Brandon didn't come over. He stayed near the microphone. Vicky leaned toward Agnes, her voice low but not low enough. "Good. She'll sit where she belongs." Lydia's fingers curled around the edge of her chair. Agnes had designed this like a performance. Public, recorded, unavoidable. There was a schedule, games, speeches, photos. The microphone wasn't there for fun. It was there for control. The cameras weren't there for memories. They were there for a version of the story, just not the one Lydia would have wanted. Agnes clapped her hands. "Everyone, we're going to do a toast." The crowd turned toward Brandon instantly, like they already knew he would speak. Lydia's pulse pounded in her ears. Marion whispered, "Why is he holding that envelope?" Lydia didn't answer because she couldn't. Across the room, Vicky rose smoothly and walked toward Brandon like she was meant to stand beside him. She didn't ask permission. She didn't hesitate. She took her place. Agnes stepped behind them, perfectly positioned, close enough to guide, far enough to look supportive. Lydia tried to catch Brandon's eyes. Just one glance, one sign he was still her husband. But Brandon stared at the microphone like it was the only thing that mattered. Brandon tapped the microphone. A dull thud echoed in the speakers. Silence fell, thick and heavy. Then Brandon spoke, calm as ice. "She's been stealing from me," he said. Lydia's breath stopped. The room gasped. Brandon lifted the envelope slightly, as if it proved something. "We did an internal audit at home. The numbers don't lie." Lydia's ears rang. "Audit? What audit?" She didn't even have access to his accounts. Brandon had insisted everything stay in his name. Vicky stepped closer, shoulder nearly touching Brandon's, claiming space, claiming him. Agnes moved to the cake table and placed something on top of the frosting, like a decoration. Papers. Lydia recognized the shape before she understood. Divorce papers. Agnes smiled at the crowd. "It's time for my son to be free of this burden," she said, like she was talking about trash, not a person. Lydia couldn't move. Marion's hand gripped Lydia's arm. "Lydia, what is this?" Lydia's mouth opened, but no sound came. Then Lydia's chair scraped suddenly. Someone behind her pulled it back fast enough to make her jolt. Her heart slammed. The baby kicked hard. Lydia turned, panicked, and saw two venue security guards stepping in from the side, quiet, trained, already instructed. Brandon didn't look at Lydia with regret. He looked at her like a problem he had finally decided to remove. Lydia stood slowly, trembling, one hand on her belly, the other reaching instinctively toward her purse where her father's heavy ring sat hidden inside, cold against the lining. Brandon's voice cut through the silence again. "Escort her out," he said. Security stepped closer. Marion moved in front of Lydia without thinking, brave and terrified at the same time. "You can't throw her out, she's pregnant." One of the guards spoke low, apologetic. "Ma'am, the event organizer says you need to leave. We're just following orders." Lydia realized in one horrifying flash that Brandon wasn't going to stop, he was going to finish. And while the crowd watched her fall, Lydia didn't know something else was already being taken from her, something that would make the night outside feel even colder. The card reader beeped once, then flashed declined in bright red letters. Lydia's stomach dropped so fast it felt like the floor moved. She stood at the small payment booth near the hotel parking exit, still shaking from being forced out of her own baby shower, still hearing the crowd's gasps in her ears. Her hands trembled as she pushed the card forward again, desperate, like the machine might suddenly grow mercy. The attendant's eyes softened with pity. "It's not going through." Lydia tried a second card, another beep, another denial. Outside, the wind felt too sharp for her skin. One of the security guards lingered near the doors, watching like she was a problem that hadn't been fully removed yet. Lydia's phone buzzed. A message from Brandon. "Brandon, don't use the cards. I canceled everything. Canceled. Not paused, not frozen, canceled. Lydia's throat tightened until she couldn't swallow. The baby kicked hard, like it was protesting the panic rising in her body. She clutched her belly and forced air into her lungs. She needed to leave. She needed to go home. Even if it was humiliating, even if it meant begging, at least home had a bed. She started toward the street to call a taxi. Before she could raise her arm, Brandon's black car rolled up like a shadow. The window lowered halfway. His face was calm, too calm. In the passenger seat sat Agnes, watching Lydia with that same cold satisfaction, like the day had gone exactly as planned. In the back seat, legs crossed, lipstick perfect, Vicky stared out the window, as if Lydia was a stranger on the street. Lydia's heart slammed. This wasn't help. This was the next step. Brandon got out. One of the security guards moved with him, more out of habit than threat, then stopped when Brandon waved him off. The guard stepped back toward the hotel. Brandon spoke without warmth. "Get in." Lydia's lips parted. She wanted to ask, "Where are we going?" She wanted to ask, "Why are you doing this?" She wanted to ask how a man who once promised to protect her could look at her like she was unwanted furniture. But Brandon's eyes warned her not to speak. Agnes clicked her tongue. "Don't stand there. People are watching." Cars slowed. Someone lifted a phone. Lydia's cheeks burned with shame that wasn't hers. The baby shifted again. Fear swallowed her pride. She didn't want a scene, not because she was weak, but because she was protecting the life inside her. So she got in. The car smelled like expensive air freshener and control. Lydia sat in the front passenger seat. Agnes sat upright beside Brandon, in the front, like a supervisor overseeing a delivery. Vicky lounged in the back seat, legs crossed, as if this was a victory ride. Brandon drove with both hands on the wheel, eyes forward, jaw tight. No one spoke for a long minute. The silence was loud enough to bruise. Lydia stared at her hands. She tried to keep her breathing steady. She tried to remember she was still a person, still a wife, still a mother-to-be. She tried to summon the old Brandon, the one who used to laugh softly when she mispronounced a word, the one who once said he liked that she didn't care about status. But the Brandon driving now didn't look like that man. Agnes broke the silence first. "You should have listened when we told you to stop acting like you belong." Belong where her own marriage? Vicky leaned forward slightly, voice smooth and sweet in the way poison can be sweet. "This is what happens when you're emotional instead of useful." Useful. The word hit Lydia like an insult dressed as truth. Brandon finally spoke, still not looking at her. "You brought this on yourself." Lydia's eyes stung. She didn't even know what this was supposed to be. She had folded baby clothes. She had loved him. She had stayed faithful. She had tried to keep peace. What crime had devotion become in this house? Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Brandon, sent earlier, appeared when she checked the screen. "Brandon, don't try to go back to the house." Lydia turned her head slowly. "The house?" Brandon's voice stayed flat. "Locks were changed this afternoon." Changed. A simple sentence that meant, you have no door, you have no room, you have no place. In her mind, Lydia saw Vicky walking through the room she had cleaned, touching the baby things Lydia had bought, sitting where Lydia had sat. The thought made her stomach twist. Vicky smiled like she could hear Lydia thinking, "It's a nice place," she said casually. "I can see why you tried so hard to keep it." Agnes gave a small approving nod, like Vicky had said something clever. Lydia's hands curled into fists. Her father's ring, still tucked in her purse, pressed cold against the lining, as if reminding her not to collapse. The car turned onto a worn street with old buildings. No gates, no security cameras protecting wealth, no polished windows, just cracked sidewalks and tired signs. Brandon parked in front of a building with a simple lit sign, Westbrook Women's Shelter. The letters glowed against the dark like a label she couldn't wash off. Lydia's breath left her body in one silent rush. Westbrook. The name hit something deep in her memory, her father's voice, years ago. "If the world ever turns cold, there's a women's shelter called Westbrook. Ask for a woman named Bertha. Show her the ring." She had never really believed she'd need that sentence. Now she was staring at the sign. Brandon got out, walked around, and opened her door like he was dropping off a package. Lydia stayed seated, frozen. Agnes leaned forward from the back seat, voice low and final. "This is where you belong until you learn." Vicky laughed softly under her breath, then looked away like Lydia wasn't worth eye contact anymore. Lydia whispered, barely audible, "Brandon, please." Brandon didn't flinch at please. He didn't soften at the sight of her belly. He just reached into the car, grabbed her small bag from the floor, and tossed it onto the sidewalk. Then he said the coldest words he had ever spoken to her, words that didn't shake with anger, because he meant them. "You're not my problem anymore." Lydia's face burned. Her eyes blurred. She forced herself out of the car on her own. One careful step, then another. She would not give them the satisfaction of dragging her. Brandon didn't wait to see if she got inside safely. He didn't ask if she had eaten. He didn't ask if the baby was okay. He closed the door, got back into the driver's seat, and drove off with Agnes and Vicky like he had just erased Lydia from his life. Lydia stood on the sidewalk holding her bag, staring at the shelter doors. Her legs felt weak, her heart felt empty, and still the baby kicked, stubborn and alive. Inside, the air smelled like disinfectant and exhaustion. A few women sat quietly in chairs, eyes tired, hands clasped. A baby cried somewhere down the hall. The sound hit Lydia in the chest. A woman behind the intake desk looked up. She had kind eyes that had seen too much. Her name tag read, "Bertha Gates." Bertha spoke gently. "Honey, are you safe tonight?" Lydia tried to answer, but only a breath came out. Bertha stood and guided Lydia toward a chair. Careful, respectful, no judgment, no sarcasm, no smirk. That simple kindness almost broke Lydia more than the cruelty had. Lydia reached into her purse for a tissue and felt something slip free, metal, heavy, cold. The ring. It hit the floor with a soft clink. Bertha bent down to pick it up. The moment her fingers touched it, her expression changed. Not just curiosity, recognition. Bertha looked at Lydia slowly, voice suddenly quieter, like the building itself needed to listen. "Where did you get this?" she asked. Lydia stared at the ring in Bertha's hand, confused and numb, not understanding why her father's old promise suddenly mattered. Bertha didn't push. She looked at the ring again, thumb tracing the strange crest engraved into it. Then she said, almost to herself, she was telling the truth. Bertha slipped the ring gently back into Lydia's palm, then reached for the phone on her desk and pulled out a worn business card from her pocket, the card she had carried for years, waiting for a girl who might never come. "Sit tight, sweetheart," Bertha said softly. "There's someone your mother wanted called if this day ever came." Lydia felt a chill crawl up her spine. Quiet foreshadowing hint. Next scene. Because Bertha wasn't calling a random number, she was about to connect Lydia to people who had been preparing for this moment for years. The phone rang once. Twice. Lydia held it so tight her fingers ached. Her breath came shallow, like the shelter air was too thin for someone who had just been erased from her own life. Across the intake desk, Bertha watched her with a new kind of seriousness, one hand resting near the old ring on the blotter as if touching it had awakened something dangerous and important at the same time. The ring had been her father's warning. Now it felt like a key. They were in a small office off the main hallway, away from the noise. It was the next morning. Lydia had spent the night in a narrow bed, waking every hour to the sound of strange doors and distant crying. The baby had rolled and kicked through the night, as if reminding her, "Don't disappear." As soon as Bertha started her shift, she had brought Lydia straight here. "Call," Bertha said gently, but her eyes didn't look gentle anymore. They looked certain. "You need to hear this from them, not from me." Lydia hesitated. Her mind kept flashing back to Brandon's cold face at the curb, the shelter sign, Vicky's smirk, Agnes's satisfied silence. She had been dropped here like trash. Now this ring, this one thing, her father begged her never to pawn, had turned the room into something else. Lydia pressed the call button on the number written on Bertha's card. The ringing sounded too loud in the quiet office. Then someone answered. A man's voice, low and careful. "Hello?" Lydia's throat tightened. I was told to call this number." A pause. A breath. Then the voice changed, still controlled, but sharper with focus, like he had been waiting for this moment longer than he wanted to admit. "You're Lydia Short," the man said, not as a question, but as recognition. "Yes?" Lydia went still. The baby kicked once, hard, like the truth had touched them both. "Yes," Lydia whispered. "Who are you?" "My name is Samuel Dillon," he said. "I'm a private investigator for an estate law firm. And you've been missing from a very powerful family's records. Lydia felt her blood turn cold. Missing. Powerful family. She looked at Bertha, confused, almost angry. Bertha didn't look away. She looked like she had just watched a door open that Lydia didn't even know existed. Lydia lowered herself into the chair beside the desk, slow and careful, because her legs were shaking. Her free hand moved to her belly, steadying herself like she could steady the world. Samuel's voice stayed calm, professional. This was a man trained to deliver information without emotion. Maybe he had to be. Maybe people like him handled lives like paperwork. I work for an estate attorney, Samuel said. We represent a family that set up a protection trust years ago. I need you to listen carefully. Estate. Lydia almost laughed, but nothing came out. An estate had nothing to do with her life. She had been raised on thrift stores and quiet rules. She had been taught to survive without asking for help. The word estate belonged to other people. I think you've made a mistake, Lydia said. My father? Samuel interrupted gently, like he'd heard this exact line before. The man who raised you may not be the man who fathered you. Lydia's chest tightened like someone had pressed down on her ribs. The room tilted in a way that made her grip the phone harder. Bertha slid a cup of water toward her. Lydia didn't drink it. Her eyes stayed on the ring on the desk. Samuel continued. That ring. You have it. That confirms something we've been trying to confirm for years. It was my father's, Lydia said quietly. Exactly, Samuel replied. He was part of the safety plan. Safety plan. Lydia stared at the wall behind Bertha like it might explain what her life had been hiding. Her mind flashed back to Mr. Short's strange warnings. Some families don't love, they own. The way he moved them. The way he never spoke about Lydia's mother's past. Lydia's voice shook. Why would anyone need a safety plan for me? Samuel's pause was short but heavy. Because your mother ran, he said, and the family she ran from doesn't lose track of blood. Lydia's breath caught. Her mother had never been described as someone who ran. She had always been spoken of like a fragile memory, like a sad story, not a woman fleeing something powerful. Who are they? Lydia whispered. Samuel didn't say the name yet. He didn't rush. He sounded like he knew this truth could crack someone open if dropped too fast. A wealthy family, he said carefully. Your grandfather is alive. He is extremely well known. And you are his biological granddaughter. Lydia's throat tightened so much she couldn't speak. Granddaughter. Her mind fought it instantly. No, that was impossible. That was movie stuff, not Lydia's life. But her body reacted before her logic could. She started shaking. Samuel's voice lowered, quieter now, as if he understood she was hanging over a cliff. Your mother made a legal request years ago, he explained. She asked that the family never approach you directly while you were young. She wanted you to grow up away from all of it. Lydia's eyes stung. So they just agreed? They didn't agree because they were kind, Samuel said. They agreed because she forced it into the trust documents. She created conditions, DNA confirmation, age requirements, and a protective fund. There it was again, a trust. Samuel continued, most of the main trust stays locked until you turn 35. That was your mother's rule. But she added early release triggers for your safety moments where we're allowed to step in sooner if your life becomes dangerous. Lydia swallowed. What kind of triggers? Another pause. Then Samuel said it plainly. Financial abandonment by a spouse, he said. Documented public humiliation can also qualify. When Bertha called and explained what happened to you last night, and then confirmed the ring, it activated the protection clause. Legally, we're required to contact you. Lydia's whole body went cold. Last night, the baby shower, the microphone, the accusation. The divorce papers on the cake, the cards canceled, the locks changed, the shelter. It wasn't just cruelty, it was the exact kind of danger her mother had feared. Lydia's hand moved to her belly, and her eyes filled. Not because she was happy, not because she felt saved, because she suddenly understood something that made her heart ache. Her mother had tried to protect her from a world Lydia didn't even know existed. Mr. Short had guarded her like a secret, and now, the moment Lydia was thrown away, the secret had opened its eyes. Samuel's voice stayed firm. Lydia, listen to me. This doesn't give you revenge. Lydia's lips parted. She didn't even know she had been hoping for revenge. She had only been hoping to survive the night. It gives you truth, Samuel said. And truth is powerful, but dangerous if you use it carelessly. Dangerous. Lydia looked at Bertha. Bertha nodded once, subtle, like she understood exactly what Samuel meant. Why are you telling me now? Lydia asked. Because until Bertha's call, Samuel said, we couldn't legally reach out. The trust forbade direct contact until age 35 unless those emergency triggers were proven. What happened to you and the shelter intake notes Bertha sent met those triggers? A few weeks ago, our internal monitors flagged unusual movements in your household accounts, Samuel added. We sent a preliminary letter to the address we had on file, nothing detailed, just a notice to contact us. But you clearly never saw it. Now, after what happened last night, we're allowed to speak to you directly. Lydia's mind flashed to Brandon's face as he drove away, to Agnes smiling, to Vicky sitting in Lydia's place. They thought she was nothing. They treated her like nothing. And Lydia had let them because she didn't know she had any other options. She stared down at her belly, feeling her baby move, slow and steady now. She whispered, barely audible, "Then let's tell it right." Bertha exhaled softly, like she'd been holding her breath. Samuel's voice sharpened again. Good. Because the next step is evidence. I need you to remember everything. Names, times, witnesses, anything you saw, anything you heard. My firm will send a family law attorney to you today. You won't be doing this alone. Evidence. Lydia swallowed. Her fear didn't disappear. It shifted shape. It became focus. Samuel spoke one final line that made Lydia's skin prickle. One more thing, he said. If they threw you away this fast, it means they're hiding something bigger than an affair. Lydia's heart thumped hard. Samuel's voice lowered. Brandon and the woman you saw, Vicky, have already moved money into outside accounts. What they did at the baby shower wasn't the first attack. Lydia's mouth went dry. The baby kicked again, like it had heard the word attack and understood it meant danger. Lydia stared at the ring on the desk, suddenly terrified of how much power could be attached to one piece of metal. Outside the little office, the shelter hallway stayed quiet. But Lydia felt it the invisible shift in the world. Like someone out there had just realized Lydia was no longer alone. Quiet foreshadowing, hint, next scene. And the very next step would not be a screaming confrontation, but a silent investigation that turned her pain into proof. The folder hit the table like a judge's gavel. Lydia flinched, not from fear this time, but from the weight of what she was about to see. It was 3 days after Brandon had dumped her at the shelter. 3 days of thin mattresses, shared bathrooms, and nurses telling her to rest while her mind refused to sleep. 3 days since Bertha handed her a phone and a ring and connected her to a man named Samuel Dillon. Now Lydia sat in the shelter's small conference room, the lights humming overhead, the distant sound of doors closing down the hall. It was late after dinner, after the shared showers, after the other women tried to sleep, but Lydia couldn't sleep. Her hand rested on her belly, protective and steady. The baby moved slowly, as if listening too. Across from her sat Samuel Dillon, the private investigator she'd spoken to on the phone. He looked tired but focused like this. Wasn't his first time watching someone learn their life had been dismantled on purpose. Next to him sat Patrice Braun, a family law attorney with a calm face and sharp eyes. Patrice wasn't warm in a sweet way. She was warm in a safe way. The kind of person who didn't panic because panic was useless. Patrice slid a pen toward Lydia. Before you look, she said gently, I need you to understand something. Lydia swallowed. What? Patrice didn't raise her voice. She didn't dramatize. She just stated it like a fact. This isn't only betrayal, Patrice said. This is a pattern. A pattern. Lydia's chest tightened. Brandon hadn't just left her. He'd designed her fall. Samuel opened the folder, and Lydia's world sharpened into numbers, dates, and proof. Lydia didn't rush revenge. She learned. That was the first decision she made that belonged only to her. Samuel had told her on the phone, truth is powerful but dangerous if used carelessly. Patrice had told her, the court doesn't care how you felt, it cares what you can prove. So Lydia did what she had always done to survive. She became careful. During the last 3 days, she had met with a nurse and a counselor at the shelter, eaten what she could, and tried not to fall apart. At the same time, Samuel had been working quietly in the background. Bertha had faxed the shelter intake notes and a signed release. Lydia had signed an authorization so Samuel and Patrice could pull any records tied to her name and marriage. The estate law firm had used its resources to move fast, faster than Brandon expected anyone could move. Now Samuel spoke slowly, laying facts down like bricks. "He didn't just abandon you," he said. "He robbed you." Lydia stared at him, her mouth dry. Robbed. That word sounded too criminal for something that happened inside a marriage. But then Samuel turned the first page. The documents weren't dramatic. That was what made them terrifying. Patrice tapped the line items with her finger. "Look at the dates. Not random. Planned." Lydia's eyes moved across the page. Transfers. Withdrawals. The amounts weren't small. They were deliberate, done in chunks, just small enough to avoid automatic alerts. Lydia remembered Brandon acting stressed those weeks, snapping at her for buying baby wipes, telling her to budget better, making her feel guilty for wanting a second pack of tiny socks. He had made her feel like a burden while he emptied the ground under her feet. Samuel slid a second page forward. "This is where it went." Lydia's breath caught. The account names looked harmless, like consulting firms, like business services, but Samuel had traced ownership. "Her name doesn't appear on the top line," Samuel said, "but it shows up in the registration filings, signatures, authorizations." "That's Vicky." Patrice's voice stayed calm. "That matters, because it shows intent." Intent? Rage rose in Lydia. Not loud rage, clean rage. The kind that didn't scream. The kind that moved quietly toward justice. Samuel pulled out printed emails and spreadsheets. Lydia saw her own name written like a crime. Irregular spending, unapproved transfers, emotional purchases. Her stomach turned. "That's why Brandon said the audit confirmed it at the baby shower," Patrice explained. "They created their own proof. A script. The microphone. The cameras. The speech. They hadn't been reacting to Lydia. They had been performing against her." Patrice placed another paper in front of Lydia. A written statement with Agnes's signature, claiming she had personally seen Lydia take funds and heard Lydia admit to misusing money. Lydia's hands tightened into fists. "She lied," Lydia whispered. "Or she signed what someone else drafted," Patrice said. "Either way, she attached her name to fraud," Samuel added quietly. "And she did it to protect Brandon and Vicky. Or to protect the image she wanted for her son. To protect them." Lydia thought of Agnes whispering, "Liability. Dead weight." Agnes hadn't just disliked Lydia. She had wanted Lydia erased. Patrice slid a notebook toward Lydia. "Now it's your turn." Lydia blinked. Patrice's voice softened just slightly. "You lived it. The court needs your timeline, and Samuel needs your details. You will help build the case." Lydia stared down at the blank page. For a moment she felt like she couldn't breathe, like writing it would make it real all over again. But she picked up the pen anyway. She wrote, "Baby shower date, who was present, what Brandon said, where Agnes stood, where Vicky stood." The moment security approached the text, "Don't use the cards." I canceled everything. The text, "Don't try to go back to the house." The drive, the shelter sign, the ring falling, Bertha's face, she wrote until her hand cramped. Samuel watched without interrupting, like he respected that this wasn't just evidence. It was Lydia taking her life back line by line. Near the end of the folder, Lydia noticed a photo that made her breath catch. A security camera still. A trash bin behind the house she was no longer allowed to enter. A hand dropping something into it. The image was grainy, but the object was clear. A burned envelope, edges black, seal half melted. Samuel tapped the printout. "We pulled this from a neighbor's outdoor camera," he said. "The camera covers the alley behind your old place." Lydia leaned closer, heart pounding. Her name was faintly visible on the envelope, and the seal, an embossed mark, looked expensive, official, old. It matched the crest on her ring. Lydia's fingers went cold. "Why would an estate send me anything?" she whispered. Patrice's eyes narrowed. "Because they were trying to reach you, and somebody didn't want you to get it." Samuel's voice lowered. "This was dated several weeks before the baby shower. Someone intercepted it and tried to destroy it." Lydia's mind flashed to Vicky's confident smile. The way she walked through Lydia's home like a buyer. The way she said, "Some people have to be removed." Lydia swallowed hard. Vicky didn't just want Brandon. Vicky wanted whatever Brandon believed Lydia didn't have, and she had burned evidence to keep Lydia powerless. Patrice closed the folder slowly and looked Lydia in the eyes. "I can file for divorce and emergency protection," Patrice said. "Abandonment, financial abuse, fraud. If we do this right, you won't just walk away, you'll expose them." "Expose." Samuel leaned forward, voice tight. "There's one more problem. Whoever burned that envelope understood what the seal meant." Lydia's throat tightened. "What do you mean?" Samuel didn't soften it. "It means Vicky may already know you're connected to a very wealthy estate. Even if she doesn't know the full story, she knows enough to be dangerous." Lydia's stomach dropped. The baby kicked once hard, sudden. Patrice's voice went quiet, serious. "We need to confirm who you are on paper. DNA test. Chain of custody. Once that result comes back, they won't just be facing your word, they'll be facing your name." Lydia stared at the burned seal on the photo, heart racing. Because if someone had tried this hard to keep a letter from her, then the truth inside it could change everything. And when the lab results finally arrive, the sentence at the top of the page will overturn everything Lydia thought she knew about herself. The lab results are back. Samuel's voice cut through the small shelter meeting room like a blade. Lydia's pen stopped midline. Her hand went to her belly without thinking, protective and steady at the same time. The baby shifted, slow but firm, like it felt the room tighten. Patrice didn't speak yet. She just slid a sealed packet across the table toward Lydia. It wasn't the kind of envelope that held ordinary news. It had weight. It carried the same embossed crest she'd seen on the burned envelope photo and on her ring. The estate seal. Lydia's throat went dry. This wasn't shelter gossip. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a door opening. Samuel's eyes stayed on Lydia's face. He looked like a man who had seen people crumble at truths like this. "Before you open it," he said, "you need to know it answers the biggest question." Lydia's fingers trembled as she broke the seal. The first page was clinical names, codes, chain of custody notes. Patrice had insisted on that part. Everything had to be clean, provable, usable later. A nurse at the shelter had taken Lydia's DNA swab under witness. The sample had been delivered to a certified lab. No shortcuts. Then Lydia's eyes landed on one line. DNA, match confirmed. Her heart stuttered. She pressed her palm to her belly. The baby kicked once, sharp. Lydia's breath caught like she had been punched from the inside. Patrice's voice came softly, steady. "It's confirmed, Lydia." Samuel added, lower, almost careful. "You are who the records say you are." Lydia's lips parted, but no sound came out. For a moment, Lydia couldn't feel the chair under her. She couldn't hear the hallway noise. She only heard her father's voice, "Mister." Short so clear it felt like he was standing behind her. "We don't borrow pride from money." She used to think that rule was about being humble. Now she wondered if it was about staying hidden. Her mind pulled up old scenes like broken film clips. Her father moving them quietly whenever someone asked too many questions. Her father never letting her post family details online, even when it seemed harmless. Her father's face tightening whenever a fancy car parked too long on their street. Her father's hands shaking a little when he pressed the ring into hers. "If you ever have nowhere to go, find Bertha at Westbrook." Lydia looked down at her hand. The ring sat there now, heavy and cold, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment to become more than jewelry. Patrice watched Lydia gently. "Do you want me to read the letter from the estate attorney out loud?" she asked. "Or do you want to read it yourself?" "Letter. So there really was a letter, the one someone burned." Lydia nodded, barely able to move her head. Patrice turned the page. "This is from the estate attorney," Patrice explained. "He represents your grandfather's legal interests and the trust arrangements linked to your birth family. He's not here in person, but he's available on speaker if you want to ask questions." Samuel had already set the phone on the table. One button, and the attorney could speak into Lydia's life like a judge. Patrice began reading, voice clear. "Miss Lydia Short, if you are reading this, it means the conditions of your protection trust have been activated." Protection trust. Lydia's stomach tightened again. People needed protection from threats, from predators, from families that didn't love they owned. Patrice read the next part slowly, letting it land. "You are the confirmed biological granddaughter of Greg Woodward." The name hit Lydia like a wave. She knew it. Not personally, but the way everyone knew names that lived on buildings and news headlines. Greg Woodward, a billionaire known for building an empire from nothing and for never forgiving cruelty used as power. Lydia's eyes filled, not with joy, not with greed, with grief, because her mother had been close enough to that world to run from it, and Lydia had spent her whole life thinking she was small on purpose. Patrice continued, "You are the only living granddaughter listed under our verified records. Only." Lydia's fingers curled around the paper. Only meant lonely. It meant chosen. It meant responsibility she never asked for. Samuel spoke softly, like he was stepping carefully over broken glass. "Your mother hid you," he said. "Your grandfather respected those terms until the trust's emergency conditions triggered. That's the legal line your mother drew. It held for years." Lydia's heart squeezed. Her mother had fought in a way Lydia never knew. Mr. Short had carried the secret at great cost. Patrice reached the final paragraph and paused, as if even she felt the weight of it. Then she read the sentence that turned Lydia's skin to goosebumps. "Power should arrive only when dignity is stripped." Lydia closed her eyes. Everything clicked. The baby shower humiliation, the fake audit, the cameras, the cards canceled, the locks changed, the shelter drop, the intake notes. They had stripped her dignity to the bone, and the trust this hidden protection had woken up the moment she hit the ground. Lydia opened her eyes and looked at Samuel. "So Vicky burned the letter because she didn't want you to know you had a shield," Samuel finished. "She may not know all the details, but she saw the seal and understood enough to panic." Patrice's eyes sharpened. "Which means we can't assume they'll stop. People who burn evidence usually keep moving." Patrice leaned forward. "Lydia, you have a choice." Lydia stared at her, heart pounding. "Do you want this handled quietly?" Patrice asked, "or publicly?" Quietly would mean safety, maybe. A private settlement. Relocation. Money that arrived without headlines. A shield without noise. Publicly would mean war smears, lies, humiliation doubled. Agnes would call her unstable. Brandon would play the victim. Vicky would twist the story. Lydia felt the baby move again. Steady, stubborn. She thought of the shelter hallway, the thin walls, the women crying at night who never got their chance to speak. She thought of being dumped like she didn't matter. And she realized something hard and clear. If she stayed quiet again, they would rewrite her story for her. Lydia lifted her chin. "Public," she said, voice low but firm. "I won't hide again." Samuel nodded once. Approval and caution mixed. Patrice didn't smile, but her gaze softened with respect. "Then we do it with evidence," Patrice said. "Not emotion. Receipts, timeline, witnesses, clean. If we go public, we file first." Lydia gripped the trust letter like it was a spine being handed back to her. Samuel's phone buzzed on the table. He looked at the screen, and his expression changed fast, tight, alert. "What?" Patrice asked. Samuel turned the phone slightly so Lydia could see the alert from the financial monitor the estate firm had placed as soon as she signed authorization. New transfer attempt detected. Origin, Brandon Knoll's account. Destination, shell entity linked to Vicky Bray. Status, blocked court hold pending. Lydia's breath stopped. Even now, after dumping her at a shelter, Brandon and Vicky were still trying to move money, still hiding something. Patrice's voice dropped to a whisper that felt like thunder. "They're cleaning the scene. They don't know we've already got the trail." Lydia's hand flew to her belly again as the baby kicked hard. Samuel looked at Lydia. "If we act tonight," he said quietly, "we control the story. We file. We speak. We don't give them another day to erase anything else." Lydia stared at the trust letter, then at the frozen transfer alert, heart racing, because now she understood the terrifying truth. They didn't just betray her. They were afraid of what she might become. And when Lydia finally steps into the light, she won't bring tears, she'll bring documents. The doors swung open, and the cameras turned like hungry eyes. Lydia stepped into the courthouse hallway and felt the heat of attention hit her face. Flashbulbs popped, microphones lifted, voices rose all at once, questions thrown like stones. "Lydia, is it true you stole from your husband? Did you cheat? Were you kicked out of your home?" For a split second, Lydia's body wanted to shrink. She was still carrying the weight of the shelter in her bones. She was still heavily pregnant now, closer to 8 months. Her belly was visible proof of everything Brandon had tried to throw away. The baby shifted, and Lydia's hand went there on instinct, steady and protective. But she didn't step back, she stepped forward, because Patrice had warned her, "If you hide, they write your story." Patrice walked beside her, calm and firm, holding a slim file folder like a weapon made of paper. Samuel stayed a few steps behind, eyes scanning the crowd. He wasn't there for speeches. He was there to make sure nobody got close enough to shove, grab, or yank her bag. Lydia kept walking. She could see them already across the room near the far wall. Brandon, Agnes, Vicky. They had shown up like this was still their stage. Brandon's face was tight, eyes cold, posture stiff. Agnes stood close to him, like a commander near her soldier. Vicky was slightly behind them, lips pressed into a small smile that looked calm but wasn't. Her eyes flicked to the cameras, measuring, calculating. They thought they would watch Lydia fall again. They didn't know she came with receipts. This wasn't a living room argument. This wasn't a baby shower. This wasn't a shelter intake. This was daylight, public, recorded, ordered. Only this time, Lydia controlled the microphone. Patrice guided her to a simple podium in front of a plain backdrop. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't need to be. The power wasn't in the backdrop. It was in the facts. Lydia looked out at the reporters and observers, people holding notebooks, cameras, and phones. Some looked judgmental, some excited. A few looked ashamed, remembering how quickly they'd believed the first story. Lydia forced her breathing to slow. She remembered the shelter hallway at night, the thin walls, quiet crying, women who had been erased by someone else's version of events. Her baby kicked again steady, like a reminder that she wasn't speaking only for herself now. Patrice leaned in slightly, voice low. We filed already. The petition is stamped. Abandonment, fraud, asset theft, emergency protections. You're not asking for permission. You're announcing what has already begun. Filed first. That mattered. It meant Brandon didn't get to set the narrative in court. Samuel murmured. He's watching you like he can't decide whether to be angry or afraid. Lydia didn't look at Brandon yet. She stepped up to the podium. The hallway noise dropped. Lydia didn't shout. She didn't cry. She spoke like a person who had already survived the hardest part. I was publicly accused of theft, Lydia said, voice steady, at my own baby shower. A small shock ripple ran through the crowd. Some had seen the clips online. Now they were hearing her side. Those accusations were false, Lydia said. Here is the evidence that shows what actually happened. Patrice signaled to a technician. A large screen on a stand beside the podium lit up. Not gossip, not rumors, documents, bank transfer logs, dates, times. Origin accounts marked joint. Destination accounts tied to shell companies. Lydia spoke while the images changed. These are transfers from our shared accounts, she said. Drained in the weeks before that event. The screen flipped. A list of withdrawals. Another image, a simple arrow diagram showing money flowing from household accounts into consulting entity A and service entity B. Underneath, partially blurred for legal reasons but clear enough, were registration records linking those entities to one name, V. Bray. Lydia didn't say Vicky's name yet. She let the evidence speak first. The screen changed again. Short text messages. Brandon's words. Vicky's responses. Brandon, did you move everything? Vicky, yes. She won't notice until it's done. Brandon, good. We'll do the announcement after. A hush fell. Even the reporter stopped murmuring. Lydia's voice stayed level. After that, she said, my bank cards were canceled. My house locks were changed. I was driven and left at a women's shelter. She paused. That is abandonment. Patrice stepped forward and placed a document on the podium, angled so cameras could catch the official court stamp. Divorce petition filed by my client, Patrice said calmly into a different microphone. Abandonment, financial abuse, fraud, emergency support, and housing orders requested. The screen changed again, a photo still from the neighbor's security camera. A hand dropping a half-burned envelope into a trash bin. Lydia's name visible, the estate seal half melted. On the other side of the hallway, a reporter shoved a microphone toward Brandon. With the evidence glowing on the screen behind Lydia, he opened his mouth on instinct, ready to deny, to spin, to explain. But nothing came out. That envelope was addressed to me, Lydia said. It was not theirs to open. It was not theirs to destroy. Now Lydia turned her eyes toward Brandon. His face had lost color. His lips parted slightly. Agnes leaned toward him, whispering sharply, "This isn't possible." but her voice sounded smaller than usual. Vicky took a step back. Not in shock. In calculation. Her eyes moved across the screen, then toward the exits, then toward the nearest camera like she was adding up how much of herself she could still save. Lydia looked back at the reporters. "I am not asking for pity," she said. "I am asking for the truth to be seen. I have cooperated with investigation. I will continue to cooperate with the court." Patrice placed a brief, steadying hand on Lydia's shoulder. Samuel's attention stayed glued to Vicky. Vicky's fingers slid to her phone, quick and subtle. A message, a warning, a plan. Vicky was not the type to lose quietly. As Lydia stepped away from the podium, a reporter shouted one last question louder than the rest. "Lydia, who is your family? Why was there an estate seal on that letter?" The hallway seemed to freeze. Brandon's head snapped up. Agnes stiffened like she'd been slapped. Vicky's eyes narrowed sharply, like she had just realized the one part of the story she hadn't understood. Lydia's heart pounded. The baby kicked hard. Patrice leaned close, voice low and urgent. "Don't answer that here. Not yet. That belongs in court, under oath, where they can't twist it." Lydia swallowed. Because she knew the next fight wasn't about marriage anymore. It was about power and blood. And Brandon, watching her now like he'd never truly seen her, looked terrified of what the court might uncover. And when the courtroom doors close, the truth won't be told in words first. It will be told in signatures, timestamps, and a verdict waiting to drop. The judge's gavel cracked once, and the sound sliced through the courtroom like a final warning. Lydia's whole body tightened. Her hand went to her belly without thinking. The baby shifted, steady but firm, as if even the unborn understood that this room could change everything with a single sentence. Across the aisle, Brandon stared straight ahead, his face stiff and pale. He wasn't smirking. He wasn't performing confidence. The news clip of Lydia's statement had spread fast. The documents had already been filed. Out there, he could bluster. In here, evidence ruled. Agnes sat behind him, clutching her purse too tight, jaw set like she could hold reality back with force. And Vicky sat 2 rows behind them, posture perfect, legs crossed like she was attending a lecture, not a hearing that could crush her. But her eyes were too alert. They moved too much. She kept watching the door like a person already planning her exit. Lydia didn't look at them for long. She looked forward. Because Patrice had told her, in court, emotion is allowed, evidence decides, and Lydia had brought evidence. The courtroom felt colder than the shelter ever had. The shelter was loud with pain. This room was quiet with power. Observers filled the benches, some reporters, some law students, some strangers who had followed the story. Phones were off, cameras were limited, but attention was focused. Lydia sat beside Patrice, shoulders straight, breathing slow. She wore a simple dress and held a small folder in her lap like it was a lifeline. She wasn't there to put on a show. She was there to stand behind the work she had already done. Patrice stood when the judge called the case. The judge didn't smile. The judge didn't frown. The judge looked down at the file like it had already spoken. Lydia could hear the rustle of papers, the scratch of a pen, the faint cough of someone trying not to make noise. Brandon's lawyer stood too, trying to look confident. But his voice came out a little too fast, a little too high, when he started his objections as if he could feel the ground shifting under his client's feet. Brandon didn't look at Lydia. He didn't dare. It wasn't because he felt guilty. It was because he couldn't read her anymore. Lydia used to be predictable, soft, apologetic, a woman he could call too emotional and expect to shrink. Now she sat like someone who'd had her dignity stripped and then given back with documents and signatures. Patrice didn't talk long. She didn't need to. She stood and said one sentence that sounded simple but carried a hammer inside it. "Abandonment during late pregnancy," Patrice began, voice steady, "paired with financial abuse and coordinated fraud. Late pregnancy was medically significant. She had doctor's notes, shelter intake notes, dates." The judge's eyes narrowed slightly. Patrice handed over the timeline Lydia had written in scene 6. It was neat, detailed, with names, times, locations, and witnesses. The judge scanned it. Then came the bank records, joint accounts drained before the baby shower, transfers into shell companies linked to Vicky, messages talking about moving everything before the announcement. Then the falsified audit, the spreadsheets, the sent emails, metadata showing they were created on Vicky's laptop, not by a neutral accountant. Then Agnes's signed statement claiming she had seen Lydia take funds and heard Lydia admit it with no date, no context, and no way to make it match the bank data. Then the neighbor's camera still, the burned envelope, Lydia's name, the estate seal, each piece connected to the next like a chain. Brandon's lawyer tried to argue misunderstanding, confusion, emotional reaction. He tried to say Brandon thought Lydia had other money and was acting in anger. The judge lifted a hand. Anger does not justify abandonment, the judge said simply. Or fraud. One word kept appearing in the judge's questions. Why? Why did the money need to be moved secretly? Why was Lydia removed from her home without access to funds? Why were false documents created? Brandon's answers didn't match the paper in front of the judge. The judge glanced at Lydia. Miss Short, the judge said, using the name on the file. Do you wish to add anything? Lydia's heart pounded. She rose slowly. Her belly felt heavier. Her hands were steady. She didn't look at Brandon first. She faced the bench. Yes, Lydia said quietly. She didn't scream. She didn't perform. She spoke the way she had at the podium, calm, because the evidence was already shouting for her. I was accused publicly of theft, Lydia said. I was removed from my own celebration and treated like I was nothing. Then my access to money was cut off. My home was locked. I was driven to a shelter and left there. A hush moved through the room. I don't want revenge, she added. I want protection for myself and my child, and I want the record to show what actually happened. The judge nodded once. You may sit, the judge said. Lydia sat. Brandon finally turned his head just enough to see her profile. For the first time, he looked unsure. Not because his conscience had awakened, because he realized she had become someone he could not control. The judge didn't look at Brandon when delivering the decision. That was the cruelest part. Brandon had built his identity around being at the center, being seen, being respected. Now the judge treated him like one file among many. Judgment granted, the judge said. 3 impacts landed like stones dropped in water. Shared assets, frozen under court supervision. Referral to financial crimes investigators. Divorce granted on grounds of abandonment and financial abuse. No long speech, no lecture, just consequences. Brandon's face drained, his mouth opened slightly. He tried to speak. Nothing came out that could change the ink on the page. Guilt wasn't the issue anymore. Proof was. Agnes clutched her purse tighter, eyes darting around the courtroom like she was searching for someone to argue with. But outside her own house, her voice carried no automatic power. Vicky stood slowly. Lydia watched her from the corner of her eye. Vicky smoothed her jacket like she was leaving a boring meeting. Then she walked out. No apology, no explanation, no glance at Brandon, just an exit clean and cold. Brandon turned his head sharply, panic flickering. His hand twitched, like he wanted to call her name. But Vicky didn't turn around. Not once. The courtroom doors closed behind Vicky with a soft click that sounded louder than the gavel. Lydia's stomach tightened, not with fear for herself now, but with the realization that Vicky wasn't leaving because she felt guilty. She was leaving because she was free. Samuel leaned toward Patrice and whispered, just loud enough for Lydia to hear, "She's running. And if she runs, she doesn't just take shame, she takes whatever money and records she managed to pull aside before the freeze." Lydia's heart thumped. Because if Vicky disappeared, she could rewrite herself somewhere else while Brandon took most of the legal hits. And Lydia suddenly needed the answer to one dangerous question. What exactly did Vicky steal, and who was she really working for? And when Lydia finally sees what Vicky left behind, she'll realize the mistress didn't just betray a marriage, she betrayed everyone. The voicemail message was short, but it crushed him. Brandon's phone sat in his hand like a dead weight, screen glowing in the dim room. He had called again another investor, another friend, another person who used to pick up on the first ring. This time the voice on the recording wasn't polite. "Do not contact this number again." The line went dead. Brandon stared at the screen, eyes wide, breathing shallow, as if he couldn't understand how the world he controlled had suddenly stopped answering him. Somewhere far away from him, Lydia sat in silence and didn't feel joy. She felt release. Not the loud kind. The kind that comes when the door finally locks behind danger. Slow down into reflection, calm, victory, emotional release. It had been months since the court hearing. Lydia didn't track time by court dates anymore. She tracked it by feedings, naps, and little socks. She carried her baby daughter in a quiet home she now owned outright through the trust and settlement. Not a mansion, not a palace, just a safe, steady place where the lock belonged to her. The nursery was small but warm, soft light, clean blankets, a chair that no one could move away from her. She wasn't surrounded by luxury, she was surrounded by peace. She had support: Patrice checking in with updates, Samuel sending short emails when something new moved in the investigation, Bertha calling sometimes just to ask, "How are you holding up, honey?" Lydia's life didn't feel like a fairy tale. It felt real. She hadn't won because she became rich overnight. She'd won because she refused to stay erased. One afternoon, with the baby asleep against her shoulder, Lydia opened her jewelry box again and looked at the ring, the one her father begged her never to pawn. It wasn't just metal anymore. It was a reminder that her mother had tried to protect her, that Mr. Short had guarded her. That dignity mattered even when no one else respected it. Lydia didn't need revenge to feel strong. She needed truth, and truth had carried her. The final thought settled in her mind like a calm verdict. He thought she was nothing, because she never needed to tell him who she was. Vicky disappeared quickly after court. Not with tears, not with regret, with planning. She sold what she could before the deeper freezes hit. She changed her hair. She changed her online name. She moved 2 states away, then again, but she didn't move as cleanly as she believed. The financial crime investigators and the estate's own analysts followed the money. Not all of it. Vicky was smart, but enough to show a pattern. Shell companies she touched, fake consulting invoices, payments from people connected to one of Greg Woodward's corporate rivals, eager to humiliate his hidden bloodline if it ever surfaced. Samuel explained it to Lydia in simple words over coffee one day. She wasn't just using Brandon, he said. She was useful to other people, feeding them information, moving small amounts, helping them test where the Woodward family was weak. Lydia pictured Vicky's calm face at the baby shower. The way she said, "For success, some people have to be removed." The way she sat in Lydia's chair without shame. Now Vicky had removed herself. She could run, but she couldn't erase all her fingerprints. And the more they uncovered, the clearer it became. Vicky didn't just betray a marriage. She betrayed everyone. Brandon's collapse wasn't one dramatic explosion. It was silence. Calls not returned. Meetings canceled. People too busy. The same co-workers who clapped at the baby shower, who watched Lydia be escorted out, who recorded on their phones, those people vanished from Brandon's life the moment consequences arrived. Nobody wanted to be tied to fraud. Agnes tried to steady him. She still spoke in commands, but her voice didn't bend court orders. It didn't open closed doors. It didn't unfreeze accounts already under investigation. In private, Brandon paced small rented rooms, blaming Lydia out loud even when she wasn't there to hear. He blamed miscommunication, jealousy, bad advice. But blame wasn't the point anymore. Reality was, he lost status. He lost his house. He lost the illusion that he could discard a person and remain untouched. Even Agnes, once so loud, grew quieter. You can't argue with a system that has your own signature on fraudulent papers. Months later, Lydia rocked her baby slowly in the nursery. The case files were in a drawer in another room. The estate documents were in a fireproof box. The ring was back in its small velvet slot. She didn't need to look at them every day. She just needed to remember that she had options now if the world ever turned cold again. Her baby yawned, tiny and soft. Lydia kissed her forehead. "You will never have to beg someone to see your worth," Lydia whispered. Not about money, about love, about basic respect. She still visited the shelter sometimes with Bertha's permission to talk to women who had just arrived, not as a savior, as someone who understood what it felt like to be dropped at those doors with nothing. She didn't tell them she was a billionaire's granddaughter. She told them how she started, with a pen, a timeline, and the decision not to disappear. The quiet strength she'd carried all her life had finally been allowed to stand in the light, and it stayed there. Lydia looked down at her baby and whispered something only the child could hear, something like a promise. Never confuse cruelty with love. Never let anyone else write your story for you. Somewhere far away, Brandon sat with a silent phone and a shrinking circle of people who would still answer him, finally understanding that the woman he dumped at a shelter had not been weak. She had been hidden, and hidden strength, once revealed, doesn't go back into the dark. The investigation into Vicky and the rival company didn't end with Lydia's divorce. It was only getting started, because the next set of documents, already being prepared in another quiet office, would reveal exactly who had helped Vicky climb into Lydia's life in the first place and how close they had come to destroying more than one woman's future.